Young adult sci-fi? Are you sure? Yep. Hi guys, I'm Whitney and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk about some modern young adult science fiction novels that I recommend. So you may be asking why we're doing young adult. YA novels tend to be a little bit more fast-paced, easier reads, and they tend to be a little bit more superficial escapism, which is something that I really love, especially for my palate cleanser novels. Next is, it's a really easy, fun way to stay in contact with your younger siblings or cousins, nieces or nephews, or even your kids. Remember that the way that we foster more sci-fi fans is to get them in it when they're younger. So that way we can use that to help them fall in love with the genre, especially for when they're older. Or at least that's my hope. So let's get into the books. Today I have 17. They're written in the 2000s or later. I wanted to do them by category because some people really like certain tropes and not others. The 4 tropes that I have for you today are aliens, dystopias, science fantasy, and then I have a miscellaneous category that's kind of a hodgepodge. So the first category that we have is alien YA fiction, and I have 4 novels for you in this section. The first is Misc YA, which is the first in a trilogy. This is a really underrated YA series that follows Emmett, who is a teenager who is competing with other teenagers on a spaceship for the privilege of mining a substance called Misc YA on an alien planet. This alien planet is colonized by a species that particularly values youth, which is why it has to be teenagers doing the mining. The company that is sponsoring this competition is a little less than altruistic, and the betrayals and the politics are all just bumps in the road of this trilogy. It was very fast-paced, it was such an easy read, and I really enjoyed it. It was kind of vaguely reminiscent of a little bit of Ender's Game with a little bit of Hunger Games mixed in. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely check out this series. The next one is The Skyward Quartet by Brandon Sanderson. So in case you live under a rock and you don't know about Brandon Sanderson's first foray into science fiction through this young adult quartet, this series follows Spensa and her quest to redeem her dead father's reputation and also her goal of becoming a starfighter pilot. The humans on this world are barely scraping out a living. This series is rife with tons of space battles. We have tons of alien contact. We have animal companions. We also have twists aplenty. So there are tons of really cool things in this series to love. So go check out Brandon Sanderson's series. Next is a duology that starts with An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This one follows a 23-year-old April who is a YouTuber who decides to do her next vlog in front of this mysterious samurai-looking statue in the middle of New York City. She films the vlog and uploads it and discovers that the statues aren't what they seem. Suddenly, she's thrust into the limelight with all the fame that comes with every action of hers being scrutinized, and the fame that she wanted so much, changing all of her relationships and maybe her whole life. This one was a really interesting discussion about social media and its place in our society. Next is Ashfall Legacy by Hideous Lore. This is the first in a trilogy. This author also wrote I Am Number 4, which I believe has its own movie on Netflix if you're interested in that. This one doesn't, so I decided to feature this one. It follows Sid Chambers, who is a teenager who believes in alien life. He believes in it because he is descended from one. His missing father, who he barely knows, was an alien. His long-lost relatives finally catch up with him, the ones that aren't from Earth, and they beg him to go on an adventure to try to find his missing father. And things aren't always exactly what they seem. There's lots of secrets, there's lots of adventure, there's lots of discovering the truth of pasts in this one, and this one was a really fun one to check out. Next category is YA dystopias. Now, before you roll your eyes, I'm not recommending all of the more popular ones like Hunger Games or Divergent, because I think everyone has already known about those for a long time. Instead, I have 4 different novels that maybe are significantly less heard of. But I do have to start with one that I've mentioned before in my beginners video. So if you want to check out where you would start with beginners adult fiction, go check out that video. This one is a trilogy by Neil Shusterman called Sci. This world is a really cool utopia future where humans have already solved all of our problems, including disease, poverty, and even death. And we're even governed by a benevolent AI. There is one problem yet, which is where our 2 teen protagonists, Citra and Rowan, come in. They're involuntarily apprenticed to something known as a scythe. Scythes are people who take care of overpopulation by randomly killing humans permanently that are not resurrected in order to control population. The 2 teenagers are welcomed into the scything world and discover that the scythes themselves are maybe not as incorruptible as originally thought. This series was such a unique premise and had so many interesting, unique things to say. It was such a fun adventure. It was a spectacular page turner. This is a very high recommend for me, even if you're not somebody who tends to read YA fiction. The next in the series is a older young adult dystopian novel called Partials by Dan Wells. This is another trilogy, and this one takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where a weaponized virus that was created by a genetically engineered human, people called the Partials, have wiped out humanity intentionally. And we have our protagonist, Kira, who is a biologist in training who's trying to cure the virus as all the people have before her. However, she starts actually making progress because she discovers a lot of hard truths about herself and the people left over. This series was really fun. There is a little bit of a romance in it, but this one had a lot to do with a lot of science, a lot of genetic manipulation, and it kind of reminded me of one of my all-time favorite TV shows, Battlestar Galactica. And because of that, this series has kind of a special place in my heart. The next one on our list, Feed by M.T. Anderson. This is a standalone, and I think you have already heard me talking about this if you've watched any of my other videos, but this one in particular follows a boy named Titus who has an implant which keeps him connected to the internet at all times. Everyone in this universe has this, and he and his friends decide to go to the moon for spring break, where a terrorist attack fries his implant. When this happens, he has to go 3 whole days without the internet, which is something that he's never experienced before. Throughout this book, we really understand that once the feed goes back in, he changes his perspective in understanding a little bit more about the world. This one was a really good, really well done, surprising novel for me, and I highly recommended the audiobook for this one because it will really just increase your experience a little bit extra. The last one on the dystopian categories is one called Little Brother by Cory Doctorow. This is first of a duology that is a little bit reminiscent of 1984, but for teens. We have a very clever teenage hacker who calls himself Winston, who is blamed for a terrorist attack on San Francisco. He is arrested with all of his friends by Homeland Security and very violently interrogated, so trigger warnings there. But when he's released into a world he doesn't recognize, where the city has become a police state and everyone is treated like they are a terrorist. Because of this incredibly heavy totalitarianism government, he decides to go ahead and do what he was accused of doing in the first place and take down the government using his hacking skills. This book is really interesting and is definitely one that is a little bit easier for a lot of teens to read than the actual book 1984. Plus, Cory Doctorow has a lot of his books that are available for free. So if you're able to get a copy, sometimes you can find an audiobook or a digital version of this book online, copyright free. So definitely go ahead and check that one out. Our next category is the YA Sci Fantasy category. This one is a little bit more fun because it can combine fantasy elements with some science fiction elements, and I have 5 novels on this one for you. The first one is Rot and Ruin, which is the first in a quartet by Jonathan Mayberry. This one follows Benny Amura on his quest to survive the zombie apocalypse. You know we have to have one of these on this list. However, in a world that requires violence, I thought that this particular series did a really good job of trying to explore the ethics of violence in a world where violence is required for your very survival. It also did a really good job of taking the adulthood right of finding a teen who has a belief about the world and then realizes slowly over time that things aren't as black and white as he originally thought, and that shades of gray are part of being an adult. I also was very impressed by this series in its way to focus on the psychology of killing a human being, even if they were infected, that could have been your friend or could have been important to you in some way in life. So I thought this was a particularly interesting route that Mayberry took. And because of that, this is definitely a series that I would recommend for parents who are looking for their kids to get into science fiction or who are looking to have some kind of really deep discussions. This book definitely also made me cry, so fair warning. The next in our series is going to be a book called Hunt. It's a beginning of a trilogy by Andrew Fukuda, I believe. Sorry again if I messed that up. This one follows a character named Jean, who is one of the last humans on the planet, in a planet that is governed by vampires. Yes, that's right. The first one was zombies. This one is vampires. So Jean must disguise himself and his humanity every day to survive, constantly living in fear that he's going to make a mistake and be inevitably discovered. This trilogy does require you to sort of suspend your disbelief, as some of the world building isn't quite as strong as some of the other books that I've mentioned, but it is a really creative, very clever concept, and I feel like it was plotted well, and the ending just gets better and better as you go through the books. So this is definitely one that you should pick up if you're able to suspend your disbelief. I thought it was a fun one. Next, we have the book Iron Widow. This is a book that was written last year, and I believe it's going to be a trilogy. The first book is out, but the second book is coming out later this year, so it is unfinished. This book follows a Chinese teenage protagonist who lives in feudal China. She has also experienced foot binding. She opens in a time where she discovers that her older sister has died due to a feudal lord's actions. And she decides to go on a quest to exact revenge for her sister by volunteering to go to that feudal lord's palace to get very close to him so she can exact her revenge. Obviously, a really cool arc of a story. However, there is a lot of science fiction elements that get plopped through the rest of the story, and it's definitely set up for a large, big sci-fi reveal towards the end. But this one was an easy page turner. I really enjoyed it, and it was definitely up for the Lodestar Award last year. So I recommend definitely check it out. I will be picking up the second book on this series. Next is a quartet that I have been secretly looking to recommend to people for a very, very long time. And it's right on the edge of adult and YA, and so I'm going to put it here. This is a series that is incredibly underrated that I super secretly love and have been meaning to talk about on my channel for a long time. And that is Kelly McCullough's Webmage. This is a 5-book series that is just plain fun. We have a series in a world in which magic has become digitalized and Greek gods are still very influential even in today's world. Our main character, Revirin, is a great-great-grandson of the 3 Fates, and he's also a particularly good hacker. Because of this, he's also a great sorcerer too, which is super fun. He goes on a hacking job and accidentally trips over a plot that the 3 Fates have been moving in motion for almost a century to take away humans' free will. And the plot ensues from there. it's just a fun mashup of magic and technology and Greek gods in today's world. And he was such a good character. I was rooting for him the whole time. There is some explicit sexual scenes in case that's something that you don't want a teenager to get into. However, if that's not a problem, it's very few and far between. There are some really mature, in a good way, relationships. The problem solving in this book is very fun and accurate as far as the world set up. So high recommend. I really love this series. I own all 5 books. Definitely check it out. The next book on this list is a duology. It's called Dark Life. This is a really unique YA novel because instead of the future of humanity being in the stars or on an alien planet, this one puts the future of humanity on the bottom of the ocean. And our main character is one of the first generation to be conceived and born down on the bottom of the ocean. You can imagine that every day, kind of like living in space, is a struggle. The family of farmers that he is born into starts dealing with a lot of pirates, and the government starts putting pressure on them to capture and prevent the pirates from going elsewhere. Of course, this is a very typical teenage saves the day kind of a situation, but he starts discovering that his physiology is a little bit different after being born down on the bottom of the earth, or the bottom of the sea, I guess I should say. So that's why this one belongs in the sci fantasy category. He may or may not have some interesting abilities. Last, but certainly not least, is our miscellaneous category. So this one, I have 1 book for each section, just because these ones don't seem to have a lot of books that I know about in these sections. So the first is going to be romance. That's right, romance sci-fi with a little mix-in of dystopia does exist. The one I want to talk about is also a quartet, although I've only read the first 3, and that is The Selection by Kiera Cass. This one is, I think, getting a movie on Netflix either this year or next year. The Selection is a televised competition where 35 girls can compete for the hand and the heart of the king-to-be, Prince Maxim. Yes, that's right. This is The Bachelor, but in the future, and in a dystopia with some high stakes and also some terrorist attacks. It's pretty good. I gotta tell you, 10 out of 10 addictive. If you haven't read it and you do like romance stories of any kind, this series is definitely a fun one that I really think you should pick up. Next is a time travel novel that is a standalone called Invictus by Ryan Groudon. This one is a really fun novel. Our protagonist, Faraway Gaius, his very birth defies the timeline. He is the son of a real Roman gladiator with a historical time traveler, and the secret of his birth is kept secret. And he's always dreamed of going to be the same as his mother, which was a historian going back in time and recording all of the events of ancient history. However, he accidentally, by a weird chance, fails his final exam, forcing him into a lot of decisions that change the history of timeline forever. I'll just leave it at that. It was a very fun read. Again, probably not gonna super wow you, but it was just a really good time, and it was a standalone. Next on this list is a military sci-fi book called The Hull Metal Girls. This book is one that has been critiqued as having a little bit of a weaker narrative by me and a couple of my friends, so you should know that this one isn't going to blow you out of the water. We follow our protagonist who comes from a very dystopian Earth, and there's really only 2 ways out of poverty. You can either win the lottery and go to an alien planet, which is very few and far between, or you can join the military, which can get you out of poverty, but has a very high price to pay. You can imagine which one she chose. There's a whole lot of power armor in this one. There's a lot of really cool technology, but it does a really good job of balancing the duality of, is the military a good thing or not? This one was one that I enjoyed, but again, did not blow me out of the water. Last, but definitely not least, is a AI YA novel. This one, I'm choosing the trilogy that begins with Lifelike by Jay Kristoff. Jay Kristoff has written quite a few YA novels that are sci-fi leaning, so if you're interested, he's definitely an author to check out. But this trilogy in particular did a really good job of leaning on a lot of classics. He includes the 3 Laws of Robotics in this one, and Frankenstein, and Star Wars. He even has the tale of Anastasia a little bit. He has some biblical themes. He has real steel. I mean, wow, there's such a hodgepodge of classic and common tropes that we see, but it's done in such an interesting, fresh, addictive way. We're following a girl named Eve who lives in a junkyard and is constantly fighting robots for money when she comes upon the ruined, lifelike android body of a boy named Ezekiel. And everything that she finds out about Ezekiel and this lifelike android changes her world forever. This was a very fun, very unique, and very interesting combination of themes that I really enjoyed. So it's definitely one to check out if you're interested. And that does it for our 17 modern YA sci-fi novels. I hope that wasn't too overwhelming. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these. Consider liking, subscribing, giving one of these books to a teenager near you so we can increase our fandom. Okay guys, until next time.